Joining me now here in the studio, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence, James Bezan, Liberal Foreign Affairs critic, Marc Garneau, and NDP Foreign Affairs critic, Paul Dewar. So, Mr. Bezan, has the government really thought through the implications of leaping into what seems to be a spreading conflict in the Middle East?
I think we have. We're looking at the one organization that has declared war on Canada, that has threatened Canadians here at home, and has inspired Canadians to join their terrorist organization, to go to Syria and become jihadist fighters. They've also inspired Canadians here to commit terrorist acts. So we have to stop this. We believe that we're being incredibly responsible with the resources that we have, and participating in the airstrikes in Syria once we receive parliamentary approval this coming week. And it is important that we are prepared to do the heavy lifting in the region, especially as ISIL has coalesced and pulled back into Syria out of Iraq. So we want to target their heavy equipment, their fighting positions, the places where they're developing their improvised explosive devices.
But Mr. Dewar, even the British or the French won't get involved in this. And this conflict is starting to look like a Shiite-Sunni battle here. In Tikrit, for example, Shiite militias aren't allied with the Iraqi army, are opposing the American air war. These are supposed to be our allies.
Yeah, so this is the problem the official opposition has. We were very clear from the beginning that we should be doing what we were asked to do. We were never asked to go in and do airstrikes and bombing. And so the government's putting forward a proposal, go into Syria and bomb. We're talking about, so far that campaign has been 120 million, the military campaign. We think the highest impact and the most responsible thing for Canada to do what we do really well, the humanitarian support, the government support, and that's why our amendment to the government's motion was very clear and concise as to what we should do. Because your point here, Bob, is that we're talking about now going into Syria. Even within Iraq, there's the government, I don't think, really understands what we're getting into here. You have different alliances. You have the Shias who are allied with Tehran, with the Iranians. You have the Kurds. You have different formations within Iraq. And then go into Syria. Well, tell you what, it's not just ISIS there. There's over 1,000 different groups you're talking about. And the government says, no, we'll just go in and bomb as if that's going to take care of it. Dealing with things at home, couldn't agree with the government more, but they're not doing that. Bombing Syria is not going to stop jihadists being trained here and going abroad. You have to deal with that at home. And there's no plan in this motion to do that.
I want to ask you, Mr. Garneau, because this is spreading now into Yemen, and it is Iranian-backed Shiites fighting Sunnis. So now you have the Egyptian, which is Sunni, army going in. You have the Sunni Saudi Arabia Air Force going in. This is not just becoming a Iraq-Syria problem. It's spreading throughout the region.
Absolutely, it's spreading, and it is turning into really a conflict on a grand scale between Shiites and Sunnis. And insofar as our mission is concerned, it's become apparent in the last 48 hours that the government has not thought it through. This is a badly defined, open-ended mission that is going to last a very long time. And when Mr. Kenney was asked, well, what is the objective? He said, the objective is to defeat ISIL, but I have no idea how this is going to finish up.
Let me remind Mark that it was the Liberals that took us into Afghanistan with the same pretext as what we're using in our battle in Syria against ISIL. It was to get rid of the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda factor that was there. Did they have an exit strategy? No, they didn't. We were there for 10 years.
And how did that
I can tell you that in this situation, the motion is a 12-month motion.
We ended up leaving Afghanistan.
Yeah, we did leave Afghanistan, and this is a 10-month motion. Our objective here is quite clear, that we want to degrade ISIL so they're no longer a threat to us here. We get the regional and secular differences that are taking place in that region.
But it looks like
the sectarian violence that we're seeing
is going to end up being in the hands of Iran. I mean, the Shiite militias are all backed by Iran.
We're no friends of Iran. We don't have any diplomatic relations with them at all. And we have been very concerned about the Islamic Republic of Iran and the way they promote terrorism, and they're an enemy of Israel at the same time. So we want to make sure that when we we are there, we're dealing with ISIL. That's the organization that has declared war on Canada, on our allies. We've seen what they've done here. We've seen what they've done in Denmark, what happened in France, what's happened in Australia, all inspired because of ISIL terrorists.
I think this is where the government overreaches. You know, to talk about the ISIL here, talking about the fear factor, etc. You know, let's start from the premise we all care about what's happening with ISIL. We should deal with it. The question is, what should we do to respond? And we've been very clear. We should be putting that 120 million that's going in a bombing campaign into places like Syria.
Although the government spent 100 million on humanitarian aid.
Well, yeah, but there's no new announcement for that, and we still have people who need our help. The UN has been begging for more money to help with Syria and Iraq and with the refugees. And let me be clear, we haven't been asked. It was the government who pro-offered both the Americans and the Iraqis for the military ask. So we're doing something we weren't asked to do. Secondly, it's dangerous in terms of the way the government interprets this, where, you know, when Mr. Mulcair asked about what about international law, there was, the Prime Minister made a joke about it and then flip-flopped and said, well, through one of his ministers, oh, actually, we are going to inform the UN, after making a joke of Mr. Mulcair asking questions. So they're not really clear on what they're doing, and we think we should do what is very clear, what we've been asked to do, where we can make a huge impact and help with the crisis in places like Lebanon, places like Jordan.
Mr. Garneau, you used to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. It's pretty dangerous going into Syria, isn't it? And what's the concern here that we're ending up, or some people are saying we're actually going to end up helping Assad?
That's definitely an issue that's on the mind of many people. Here we are going after ISIL, which is a despicable, barbaric organization, and in the process we may ironically be helping that other despicable regime that is responsible for 200,000 deaths, that's used chemical weapons, that is responsible for over 10 million refugees. That's the situation that many people see us doing at this point.
You know, a lot of people ask, why aren't the air armies, air forces doing all of this? Why is it always the West that every time we seem to go into the Middle East, we seem to make it worse?
But see, in Syria, aside from the United States that have been conducting airstrikes, you have the United Arab Emirates, you have the Saudi Arabians, the Jordanians,
but they don't have
the
any
Bahrains.
boots on the ground.
Well, but we expect that the fight on the ground will have to be done by the Iraqi government, their security forces, and their regional partners. It's not going to be Canadians.
But Americans have said. You're not talking about Syria. He's asking about Syria.
I'm talking about Syria. We're not putting boots on the ground.
Okay, so you're saying the Iraqis are going to go into Syria?
Well, they are using Article 51, which is the right to self-defense. They're using Article 51, which is the right to self-defense.
The Americans are doing that.
No, so the Iraqi government has put in the same request. Make sure you know that.
But you're now saying the boots on the ground.
Paul, please, let me. The United Nations has a request, not only from the Americans, who have also registered for collective self-defense under Article 51, the government of Iraq has also registered with the United Nations under Article 51 for defense.
But we were talking about Iraqi boots on the ground to Syria. I'm just trying to understand what you're saying here. So you're not saying that.
We're saying that the ISIL terrorists are going to have to be defeated on the ground by Iraq and the regional partners. And if that requires Iraq going into Syria to go after ISIL because of their own self-defense, they're going to have to do that. They have registered under the United Nations for the purposes of
No, I get that. You ridiculed it before, but now I understand you get it.
No, I get it.
Well, the Prime Minister didn't when Mr. Mulcair asked.
And I can tell you that we're going to be reporting through the UN once the motion is passed on the same basis. Let's go back to the issue of humanitarian aid. We are the 5th largest donor in Iraq, the 6th largest donor in Syria. We've helped over 1.7 million refugees with food, another 1.25 million refugees with shelter and clothing, and over half a million children for education. And we're going to continue to do more. Just be patient. There's more.
But if we weren't bombing in Syria and we weren't continuing bombing in Iraq, we could be doing more on the humanitarian side. Which, look, make no mistake, make no mistake, we could still be doing the humanitarian assistance and not, we could put the money that was into the military budget into the humanitarian assistance, and there would still be the bombing that's going on that our friend is talking about. But there is no plan from this government in terms of where the end of that is and where the support should be appropriately.
Final word to Mr. Garneau.
Well, thank you very much, Robert. Paul is right. There's a massive need for humanitarian aid, no question about it. We've both been to the region. The other thing is this. The Liberal Party's position is different from the NDP's position in that we believe the most important thing for Canada to be doing with our military forces is training the Iraqi security forces, because ultimately they will have to push and defeat ISIS, push them out of Iraq.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.